Hello and welcome to another edition of Thrive and Grow, where we make you learn, listen, act, and ask questions. And that's how you learn and grow. We've had a long gap between the earlier programs and this one. And I guess what happened is when things started getting unlocked, so to speak, we ended up trying to figure out what was the best way to work in a combination of some people are still locked down and some people are still unlocked. And while things were struggling to resume in the way that we thought they should and they would, things didn't really take off that well. And we're still trying to come to grips with how to work in this new changed scenario. Managing work itself is challenging. Managing teams becomes even more challenging, especially because work from home has now become almost like a norm for most people and for most companies. And it's also a fact that trying to get things done when people are at different locations, probably different time zones also for some companies, and also in different work environments. And in such circumstances, managing people becomes even more challenging. Not only because it's challenging for the team manager or the team leader to be able to do it and the companies themselves to do it, but also for the people and the individuals who are working for themselves. So they themselves are challenged. And in this scenario, we thought that it would be most appropriate for us to bring in an expert who will be able to tell us more about how things are done. So we have with us Mr. Pravin Sathe. He's a management and business consultant. He will be telling us more about aligning the 3 Ps, which is basically people, performance, productivity, right? And without much ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Pravin Sathe. Hi, Pravin. Thank you. Welcome. And thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Sandeep. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Let me start
Yeah.
off firstly by congratulating you on an amazing show that you have put together. I have seen the earlier editions. It's a great
Oh, thank
initiative,
you.
and I think one that is needed in today's times. And a
Thank
further
you.
special thank you for having me uh, on this particular
No,
in this
no, the
particular edition.
pleasure is, yeah,
I
pleasure is
presume it's
completely
the
mine.
last one before we say goodbye to what has been probably what is it called
Yes.
annus horribilis as they call it, I believe, right? One of the worst years
No,
probably
yeah,
that one could have hoped for.
yes, I know it's very, very challenging. Some people are saying it's the worst year. Some people are saying, it's probably sometimes the best thing that has happened to them. But before we go into that, let me formally introduce you, Praveen, to the audience. And so, for all of you who are watching, first of all, thank you for joining us here. Praveen Sathe is a business management consultant and coach. He has over 30 years of total experience. Half of it has been spent in the industry and the other half as a professional trainer and coach, primarily focusing on the people aspect. He's worked, trained, and advised companies right from the smallest MSME, the small and medium enterprise, all the way to very, very large companies like Siemens, TCS, Mahindra and Mahindra, Aditya Birla Group, and many others. If I'm not wrong, Praveen, I think you have close to about experience of training over 15,000 people in the span of your career, and that's really, really commendable. So folks, we have somebody over here who has worked in the companies, small companies, large companies, and then gone to the other side and trained them, helped them to get more productive. And he's going to share with us his learnings and what he feels and he believes should be the way that we need to go about managing these 3 Ps. Yeah, Praveen, I would like you to add to a little bit about your background and experience. And before we start, tell us why is it that you picked this? Any particular reason? Because this is a certain passion about doing this, or it's just one of those things that happened to you.
Yeah, good. So I believe the question is more about why the people part is what I focus on, right? If that was the was that the
No, the question is more on why you are doing the people part.
yeah, sure, I can understand. So the way I saw it was, and I think some of our slides will very clearly bring it out. See, over a period of time, I've seen how businesses have grown, morphed, changed, transformed, right? And obviously, that's a function of how society changes. Probably both Sandeep, you and I are products in a way of the 1991 liberalization generation, right? I think before that, industry was very different in India. When we started our careers, we were, suddenly pushed into a scenario where we had no
Yeah,
clue what was happening.
we were right in the middle of that, and then transition. Yeah.
Correct. So there was a traditional way in which probably industry and business was run before 1991. When we started, it suddenly started becoming very different. And frankly, I think we were all grappling with it, right? And so over a period of time, I worked with a German multinational to start with. Then I went into the chemical industry. Then I went into some other organizations. So large, medium, small, everything that I saw. And then somewhere after having picked up all the experience in various functions and organizations, over the last 13 or 14 years, I thought, let's try to put all that experience to some good use. And that's when why the people part really comes to play. And maybe the answer will come if you start, probably the slide show itself, so that we can answer it alongside. Why don't we get the first slide up?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Yeah. So we are talking of the three P's, which is people, performance, and productivity. And specifically in today's, somewhat work from home focused world, this is becoming even more important. Even when we didn't have work from home, what was the real reasoning behind my focusing on this people part really? If you can move ahead, I'll take you through the explanation also. So let's look at understanding what it is that makes business tick. So typically businesses always tick because of what I call 4 M's, right? So the first M is the money. The second M is the material. The third, with all of this, you put together a method. And the fourth, you use your manpower to put all the earlier three things together, right? Now, when I'm using the word manpower, a statutory disclosure, this is obviously across the board, all kinds of genders. It includes obviously women power also, which we are very much interested in really nurturing and growing in India. No country ever and no organization ever is going to grow without the contribution of the ladies also. Let's be very clear. So anyway, I'm using it because it's a more accepted term and it fits in with the 4M concept, as I call it. Now, to answer your question, there was a time when if you had money, you could do a lot of stuff. You could probably rule the world. There was a time when you needed to have access to specific materials, raw materials, which otherwise people did not have. And then there were certain times when you had a specific way of doing things or a specific method of manufacturing, which gave you a competitive advantage. Right. Now look at it in terms of how the business has grown since the 90s and since liberalization and everything happened. Today, frankly, out of these four, if you analyze carefully, Sandeep, which is the only 1M where as an organization you can have the competitive advantage? Look at it carefully. Today, money is really no more the competitive advantage where you say only some people who have the money can probably grow. No. The last figure I heard is about $17 trillion of cash is slushing around in the world, waiting to be invested in good businesses. So Sandeep, if you have a great business idea, you know where to go. So if you have a good business idea, money is not going to be the bottleneck. I think that's the point I'm trying to bring up. If you go ahead, look at material. We know, Thomas Friedman, I think, wrote a book called "The World Is Flat," if I remember it correctly. And what he really tried to say is that across the board, today you can get material from anywhere. There was earlier a case where you needed to have the contacts, you needed to be in a specific industry, you needed to know the right people, etc., etc. I think now with liberalization, you can get material from anywhere. Methods are no longer really those secretive things that you need to keep in your locker and vault and stuff like that. So all these three are no longer your competitive advantage. So what's the only competitive advantage any business has? If you go ahead to the next slide, yeah. What we really see is neither money nor material nor method is going to give you any competitive advantage. The flat world of today, Sandeep, leaves you with only 1M, which is your manpower, your people, your human capital, which is your biggest competitive advantage. And this is something I realized as I grew and as I went ahead. And so I said, this is fascinating. And this is something that we should work on. So I think that's probably, hopefully, that answers your question in terms of why my focus was.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up. A lot of people generally complain that they don't have the other three. And arranging for the other three is actually a challenge. Whereas, as you rightly pointed out, it's more in terms of. I think it was Lee Iacocca who said in his book once when he built Chrysler and he became when he rebuilt Chrysler and brought it up and he became very successful. I believe they asked him that if you had to do this again, what would you need to do? And his response was, give me three of the men of, the three people of my choice and I'll do this all over again. So the fact is he didn't also mention, any of the others, that are there. So it's very true in terms of that, and very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
go forward.
So now, yeah, sure. So now, let's try to kind of get into the thick of action, so to say. Now, what are the challenges? So, whereas the fourth M by itself as a concept is great, what are the real challenges? And this is, though I have titled it as some challenges post-corona, frankly, these are challenges which over the last few years we have been already seeing. And again, this is about how business has changed. And I think no better analogy you can draw than from cricket, specifically with a cricket crazy country like ours, and today being one of the better days, I
And
suspect.
we won the match today. Yes. So
Yeah, right. So over the last 20 years or so, look at what has happened. You had 5-day test matches first, right? Where people had all the time and you could take a holiday for 5 days, see the whole match, then go into the coffee shop, discuss it in the evening, and then come next morning and all of that. Now, obviously, from that, about 2-3 decades back, you came into what was called the one-day international, right? Where in one day you got the entire result. Now, people did not even get one day off as we started really growing fast. And in the spirit of instant gratification, as we call it, what happened? The one day also morphed into what is called T20, right? Now look at T20, and this is very interesting, Sandeep. I think if you are a bit of a cricket fan, also you will appreciate a
yep.
very interesting statement I heard recently. Some English cricketer, I forget the name. He was asked, what has happened to cricket and stuff like that, and he said, you know what, T20 is a different game, but played with cricket implements. Right. So
Interesting.
so that was a very interesting statement he made, that okay, you have got a bat and gloves and ball and stumps and umpires and stuff like that, but really what you are doing is a completely different thing. Anyone who was playing 5-day tests the way they were playing earlier in the 80s and 90s, if today they started playing T20, they would not survive. Correct? Exactly the same thing, if you ask me, really is happening in business. I think you need to be very fast, you need to be very quick. There's a different set of rules altogether that are working around. And at this stage, I want to invoke the name of the legendary Guru Ramcharan, who, along with Bill Conetti, wrote a book. And in that book, the first thing they have written, probably you have read it, Sandeep, is he says if businesses managed their money as badly as they manage their people, right? If businesses manage their money as badly as they manage their people, most would be bankrupt, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Ramcharan is the god of execution. I mean, his book on
Absolutely.
execution is like the Bible for
Yes,
it. And
yeah, absolutely. So we've read it and we keep referring to it every time we do a project, because you're absolutely right. Strategy is all in the boardroom. The real stuff is out there on the cricket ground, right? So that's where the execution happens. And when he makes a statement like this, I think clearly we need to get up and take notice, right? So organizations say that they are managing their people well, but if they really managed their money as badly, then they would go bankrupt. That's what he said. So I think this is really the context I want to set here in terms of why the people and how we need to manage the people. We'll go ahead and look at. So based on all of this, let's look at really the 4 steps in which we manage our business and look at how we can look at the 3 Ps effectively, so that we can run the business really the way we want to run it. So what are the 4 steps? Let's simply look at the people challenge. The first thing is obviously to recruit. So you get your best talent. Once the talent comes in, that does not end your story. You need to nurture it, right? Once you want to nurture it, once the talent is in, how do you know that that talent is really being put to good use? For that, you need to have some parameters whereby you can monitor that talent, right? And when you monitor and you find that some things are not going the way you would want them to go, you would get into the 4th part, which is the correct part. So this is a very nice cycle that we have come up with, where you recruit the best talent, but you need to nurture it even after the talent comes in. After nurturing also, to see that really you get the maximum output, you need to monitor them. And if for some reason things are not going right, you need to correct it. So this is really the cycle that I would like to focus on. Yeah. So we'll look at each of these in a little bit of detail. The first one is the recruitment challenge. Right now, whereas all these are very simple things, sometimes we end up making a bit of a mess, as we'll go ahead and see. So obviously, recruiting the best talent to face today's challenges, I think this is what we want. Can we go ahead? Nurture, what does it mean? It means that once you recruit, the talent needs to be nurtured, and that's most important. One of the important things, Sandeep, in the nurture phase always is, when a flower does not bloom in any environment, do you blame the flower or do you blame the environment? Right? That's a very interesting
Oh,
statement. Right?
very
And it's
nice.
always the environment. But when you look at a person not performing in an organization,
It's
invariably
always
everyone in the organization says, "Arey,
thanks.
ye kaam nahi karta." Yeah? So it's actually the environment that you need to look at, which is why the nurturing part has become so important. Third, of course, the monitor, which is, monitor, measure the performance, put in place matrix, which we'll talk about, a favorite topic for me really. And finally, the correct, which is the taking corrective steps in case of altering performance. Okay, let's go ahead. So these are the 4 steps. And if they were so simple, then why do you think there is so much unhappiness all around? And this unhappiness is not post March 2020 only. It's not about linked with the COVID era only. I'm saying overall, if you look at organizations, lot of organizations and a lot of people working in organizations, somewhere or the other, constantly feel that something somewhere is not going right. Maybe they are not being rewarded enough. Maybe no one appreciates whatever is happening. Maybe the kind of work that they are doing, no one else is doing in the organization. मेरी तो कदर ही नहीं है यहाँ पर, right? Standard statement. I'm sure that you've heard so many times. Now, if everything is so
Yeah,
structured,
and this is something which is like, it's like textbook 101. It's like a no-brainer. But yet, I mean, despite it being so simple, it's not really so simple to implement, and a lot of thought needs to go behind it. Yeah,
sure.
very
Yeah.
true.
So this is a background.
Yeah.
Now let's look at each step in detail. Recruitment step, the first step. Good talent is scarce. Now this is so much counterintuitive, typically in India. On the one hand, we say 10 crore people are looking for a job. On the other hand, we say that there is no talent available. Now, what is this? Right? But this is a funny thing, and this is, we remain a funny country in that sense, as we always say. There's about, from what I understood, about 1 million people which is hitting the job market every month. So 1 crore people hit the job market every year. That's the kind of figures that are coming up. And yet we don't get the talent, because it's not just the numbers, but it's the actual good people whom we need, right? So how do we do that? We need to make an informed recruitment choice through various methods. So what could be some of the methods? Let's go ahead and see those methods. Should go to the next idea. So we are looking at seeing whether we can look at not just interviewing the person, but also getting a little deeper. So can we use something like a psychometric tool? We have some friends here, on the show who are experts at psychometrics, as I can see. So psychometrics plays a very big role, not only at the recruitment stage, but even later. But can we use something like that? Can we try to put some figure to the person's characteristics and behaviors and attitudes? And by the way, we are not saying a person is good or bad, please. Psychometrics is a very interesting field. Never do we make a label saying he is a good person or a bad person, not at all. All we are saying is he or she comes in with these specific characteristics. See if those characteristics are going to suit your role. I think that's the more important part we are looking at. Okay. Can we align that person with the company's competency model? Now, so many companies don't even have a competency model, which is very sad, but that's something that you need. What exactly are the qualities that you really need in a person? Competency, the easiest and closest Hindi word is really kabiliyat, as we say, right? So how many people really have that competency to do that role? Interviewing, one of the most important tools of recruitment, very, very badly done, very terribly neglected. Most people believe are interviewing mein kaun si badi baat hai. We've done so many interviews, but really the interview is not just taking the CV and reconfirming whatever is written in the CV, right? Which is sadly what happens in most interviews. So there's a whole so there's a whole new book that can be written on interviewing.
And the standard question is, tell me something about yourself.
Oh, absolutely. It's a standard thing, tell me something about yourself.
I've also heard some interviewers saying, tell me about yourself, start from your school. So it's like,
I half jokingly only, I said this question is really asked because that is the time the interviewer is taking to read through the CV to find out what should I ask him or her, right? Because that's the level of preparation or lack of preparation that people have before going into an interview. Very sad, but anyway, we'll go ahead. And then, of course, the most important part, which is coming up today, which is the cultural fit. I think every organization has a particular culture, and we are not saying good or bad, but yes, people who fit into that culture well are really the ones who are going to look at gelling well with the system and the ecosystem and taking the organization forward. That's when the win-win really happens. So the recruitment remains important.
So Pravin, we have an interesting question, and with your permission, I think we can just take some of the questions as they come along so that it becomes relevant during the discussion. Okay, so there's a question here which has come up. I'll just put it up on screen. Okay, here
Sure.
it is.
Yeah.
So Anand is asking, how are psychometric been validated on actual performance?
Yeah, sure.
So I think
Good
it's
point.
probably the correlation between what you think the test comes up with and
Yes, yes,
does it
yes,
actually
yes,
translate to a result on the field.
yes. And this is a very good friend and a guru in a way who's asked this question. So,
Yeah. So
so
he
actually, it's
knows
the other way around.
he knows the right question to ask.
He knows the right question to ask. Unfortunately, he's asking you to the wrong man. Kya karoon main?
We need to ask him the question instead.
Yeah, he'll have an answer for that. No worries. But anyway, to come to the main
Yeah.
question. So, Anand, it's the other way around actually. What has happened is we take psychometrics and say, now can we actually validate it on the actual performance? We go the other way around and say, what is the actual performance expected? Do you even have that in mind? If you had that in mind, if you had the competency framework in place, you would know exactly what to ask for and which psychometric tool to use, right? Psychometric, by the way, is wrongly understood to be a go or no go decision. Not at all. It is one part out of 4 or 5 other things that you will be doing. All we are trying to say is it is going to give you an indication of what that person might be good at or might not be good at. And so, just to, because we have a lot of other things to discuss, but let me just give you one example. There was one particular case where we found that because of the fact that that person was not at all compliant, in his approach, he was actually not fit for a job which required a very high level of compliance, because there are certain jobs, right, finance, and
Right.
if you're looking at the legal aspects of HR, you need
Right.
to be extremely compliant. Now, if you're not a compliant person, you obviously should not be in that job. And those were some of the things that came out. So, as a matter of fact, to answer the question, Anand, if we had done the psychometric correctly, if you had read a wrong psychometric tool, obviously you would end up with a mess. But if you use the right psychometric in the first case itself, you would have seen where that fitment is. Of course, in a worst case scenario, we also see that if there is a case where you've already got the person in, and then you did the psychometrics as part of a regular assessment, then you can actually do a job rotation also. So there are ways out to make the best of the scenario. That's the answer.
Yeah. There's another question, and we'll take that while we're here on this slide itself. Siraj is asking
Yes.
how to assess culture in an interview. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
that's
Raj,
very,
again,
very
good point. Raj, culture
Awesome.
again,
Awesome.
badly. Yeah, good point. Again, the culture is of the organization. It's not of the candidate at all. So, does the organization know what the organization culture is in the first case? If I
Right.
ask 5 people in an organization, write down 2 aspects of your culture, and if all 5 of them write somewhat similar stuff, then at least I'll say, okay, the organization has a culture and people are aligned to it. Most of the times, I myself as an interviewer don't know my own culture, and then I go and assess whether this person will be fitting into this culture or not. Sadly, that is not the way it happens. If I know my own culture, then I can accordingly find out whether this person is going to fit into that culture or not, right? So the interview is not really to assess the culture. The interview is to assess the candidate in terms of an existing culture that I have. Or at times, of course, if you're looking at recruiting the topmost man, he is also being recruited to change the culture. That's also possible. In which case, you actually need someone who's an outlier and who is doing
Yeah.
something amazing, or who has already done something amazing, because you want to change the culture. So
There's
these
an
are deep
interesting.
questions.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry to interrupt. There's an interesting comment that just came up from
Okay.
Kaval. He
Oh, wow.
says, "I was caught in a pub for an interview. So much for
Wow.
the culture of that company." Yeah. So
Wonderful.
good for you. Hope they pick up the tab. Yeah. So
Yeah, and that's one. And I think he got the appointment later only after the interviewer was 2 or 3 down. I'm sure that must have.
yeah. Anyway. So okay. So let's move on. Oh,
The lighter.
interesting.
Okay. Now this is something, Sandeep, that I want to ask you. Now let me change the roles. Let me swap roles, and I become the interviewer now. So let's say, Sandeep,
Oh,
you want to put your millions of dollars to good use. Okay.
mhm.
And you want to create an IPL team. Let's say. I believe next year they're going to open up 2 more teams, so maybe you can bid for one of them.
Yeah. There's an Ahmedabad team for also.
Yeah, whichever you can bid your own team, wherever. So just to come back to the main point, I'm giving you 2 people that you can bid for. So both are batsmen.
Okay.
Batsman number
Okay.
1, I have just noted some points, and batsman number 2, I have noted some points. So batsman 1, stylish, hard hitter, brave, can bat at any position. Amazing qualities, right? I mean, especially the last point. In a T20 era, can bat at any position. So amazing, है ना? For opener से लेकर के pinch hitter, everything is possible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Batsman number 2, however, has an average of 55.80. He has a strike rate of 112, and he hits a century every 4th inning.
Wow.
Okay. So these are 2 different people. Now,
Okay.
if I were to just tell you, okay, Sandeep, based on this, go for it. Tell me, whom are you going to recruit?
Okay. So It's
Maybe
not a
sorry,
very
our audience also can probably put in if they have any particular
yeah.
preferences.
I
Our
mean,
audience.
the audience, please feel free to throw in your suggestions whether you go for batsman number one or two. See, I think batsman number one has got enough of qualities which I think would be required based on I mean, if you're looking at a T20 kind of a situation, yeah, we need a batsman right down to number 11. So if that person can bat in all different scenarios, under lights, hard ball, new ball, soft ball, turning ball, so that's a great thing to do. Whereas
And
the
when
other
he
one is
bats
a
at all
specialist.
these positions, what should he be doing?
No, he should be hitting like hell. There are no two
And
ways to
doing
think
what?
about it. And since he's a hard hitter and he's
Yeah,
brave and he can bat at any position, oh, he's
sure.
one hell of an asset. Yeah.
But then what should he be doing when he hits and when he's at any position? Typically, you expect that he should
Right.
really hit the
So
strike
he
rate.
should perform. Yeah, I know where you're heading with this. Yeah, he should perform. That's right.
Yeah. Let's go to the next one also. It's probably on the same lines. You need to now
Yeah.
select. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Ah,
So this is about a bowler.
this is your googly now.
No. So the bowler one here is someone who bowls a googly. He uses
Uh-huh.
what's called a dusra. Even I'm not very sure. Cricket fans would know. So one of my friends told me that dusra is something that he bowls well. So I believe it's some kind of a variant of a googly, I suspect.
Yeah. It
And
goes the other
interestingly,
way.
he's very good over and round the wicket, both.
Okay.
Right. So this is one bowler. And my other bowler, however, has got some boring statistics to himself. 5 wickets, some 14 times in the past 80 innings, which is supposed to be good. A strike rate of 18.4 and the best economy rate, as they call it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, these are some of the specifics that you have.
So,
Again,
so now that I know where you're going with this, I'm going to go for bowler number two because it's a measurable metric, which is what a lot of people in the audience have also said.
yeah. So I think that's what
Yeah.
we are trying to say. That whereas there is style and there is charisma and all these things which come into play at times, and unfortunately, why I'm trying to bring this is we end up recruiting candidates on the basis of that, right? He speaks very well. He's flashily dressed, and he can express himself in 4 languages, and he can take the crowd along with him, and he can carry the party with him, so to say, in an evening and stuff like that, which is all good. One is not denying that. But at the end of the day, do you need someone who's only flashy and striking, or do you need someone who can really perform? I think that's the story we are trying to bring here.
Very true.
So the recruitment pitfalls. I'm also bringing some pitfalls alongside. Okay, we'll move ahead.
Yeah.
Once the recruitment happens, and once you know now that you need to recruit better, what do you do next? You need to start looking at nurturing. Now, this is turning out to be a big challenge in today's world. I'll quickly run through this because in today's world specifically, you have at least 3 or 4 generations in a workplace, right? So you have the baby boomers who are kind of on their way out, and then you have Gen X and Gen Y, and then the millennials and all sorts of things. And everyone's alignments are different, right? Some of them want only respect, not just the monetary benefits. A lot of the millennials, and I'm sure in your home you have millennials who say that it's not the money. I want to work because it is in sync with my vision, right? So does the organization have a vision? Does my organization believe in sustainability? Now there are cases when the interview board has been asked questions by a young chap. What is the sustainability goal of your organization? And the elderly people sitting at the interviewing table have no clue what to answer because that's that's what it is. So to nurture, you need to also look at seeing what are people's interests in today's world. So that's something that they want. They want something which challenges their mind. The youngsters today are looking at that rather than the only monetary compensation part. If we can move ahead to the next slide. Yeah, we are looking at things like, okay, what are we doing on diversity? What are we doing on inclusion? And stuff like that. So a lot of these are the nurturing level challenges that we are going to face and organizations are already facing. We'll discuss that as we go ahead. Monitoring, extremely important. To be able to now manage the nurturing well, we come to the monitoring part. And so here we're looking at whom to monitor, what to monitor, when to monitor, and how to monitor. Right? Okay, let's go ahead. How does monitoring help? Just as we saw in the slides earlier, if you are able to monitor, you are able to look at specifically bringing it down to measurables. It helps the individuals because it helps them to know exactly what is expected from them, right? And for leaders, it helps because it helps them to define what are really the deliverables that they can have from either the direct reports or from their departments or sections. So the moment you have everything laid down in as much black and white as possible, you are leaving out shades of gray. And shades of gray are the only ones which are turning out to be the biggest grief. because you always end up at the end of the year saying, no, I thought you will do this and I thought you will do that, and the person who's being appraised said, but you never told me this, and I didn't know this is what was expected. So these are not the appraisal discussions we want, quite frankly, and that's the reason we are looking at monitoring on a slightly better scale. Okay, just we'll complete monitoring before we can take some more questions. So this is an interesting slide, the monitoring step. What we are saying is anything that gets quantified, go next, gets measured. Right? Very simple. You quantify it, you'll be able to measure it. Now, the moment you are able to measure it, what do? You monitor it. Right? And the moment you monitor it, and you know that you are near or far from your strike rate or whatever rate that you want to achieve, you'll start looking at achieving it. The moment you achieve it, apart from feeling good, what happens next? You typically get rewarded. And the moment you get a reward for a particular action, simply speaking, what are you going to do? You're going to repeat that. Right? So typically, even the child does this, he knows that this kind of behavior is going to get me a chocolate, he's going to do it again and again. Right? So it's virtually the same. And so what we are saying is, if we can scientifically look at this entire approach of how to measure performance, the heartburn will be reduced a lot. So this is probably really one of the most interesting slides that I would like people to focus on here. Okay, let's go ahead. So the monitoring step, yeah. These are some of the harder issues. How do you monitor? You put in place certain systems. So these are all certain tools. Maybe Sandeep, when you started your career, there was something called MBO, which I'm sure you must have heard of, management by objective, which was long back. From there, we shifted to something called the BHC scorecard. Yeah. Today, of course, the flavor is more on what we call objectives and key results, which is OKRs. So these are all ways in which you can set in place your scorecards or whatever it is that you need to achieve. So what do all of these do? All of these really bring down your entire performance to certain measurable parameters, right? So the SMART goals, which we always talk about, specific, measurable, achievable, etc. Now, this is important because the moment you do this, now you're sitting only with that one piece of paper whenever you're sitting with your boss, whether it's for the quarterly discussion, the half-yearly appraisal, or the year-end appraisal. And when you have a common set of objectives and key results that you're talking about, it becomes so much easier for that conversation to head right. It does not end up in terms of becoming a blame storming exercise as it often happens, nor does it also lead to a case where post appraisals a whole lot of people suddenly get into a depression, a whole lot of resignations come in and stuff like that. All of that really happens not because of all this not having been done in the earlier part of the year. That's the way I look at it. Of course, these are the harder aspects, which is to quantify it. But there's one more slide, which is the softer aspects. Now, this is the most important part. See, the softer aspects is you make a goal sheet, you give it to a person. First, see whether that goal sheet has been accepted by him or her. So look at the second point. Is the goal sheet arrived at jointly, or is it pushed down hierarchical? Just because in one department I made a particular score sheet, it should also be a scorecard for someone else in my department. It won't work. Is there a buy-in on both sides, and is there complete understanding on both sides also? Right? Interesting part, Sandeep. After all this is also done, there's still some other element which one needs to look at and which is important. And if you look at the right side of this slide, what does it tell you, Sandeep? What are the two symbols there? What do they tell you? What are you seeing there?
Okay, there's a traffic light, which seems to have all three of them on, and that I think is the Great Wall of China. So what's the relevance for the traffic light?
Oh, okay. Yeah, great. So the traffic light and the Great Wall of China, two completely disparate objects, if you ask me, and how are they connected? Okay. Now, a traffic light, typically world over, red is supposed to be stop, green is supposed to be go, right? Now, ideally, if people follow this very, very religiously, traffic jump spot, is that right? Sandeep, are you there?
Yeah. It's okay. I think you dropped off for a while, but I think you're back now.
Okay,
Go ahead.
So, yeah. So I said the traffic light should typically be the safest place, right? If everyone followed these signals, because red is stop everywhere in the world, green is go everywhere in the world, right? But what happens at traffic signals mostly say in India itself? You're scared because even though you are at green and you're going, you don't know if some other fool is coming the other wrong way and is probably going to end up in an accident with you. So what happens? It's a system put in place, but it is getting disrupted by whom? Not by the signal itself, but by the persons, right? The Great Wall of China, an amazing piece of human creation, supposedly the only human man-made structure that you can see from the moon. That's what they say. I have not been there. Probably you know better, Sandeep. Yeah. So they say that's the
Yeah,
only
sure.
man-made
I've
structure
been
you
on the
can
moon.
see from the moon. Yeah, yeah. You are over the moon at
Yeah,
times anyway, but that's okay.
yeah.
So to come to the Great Wall of China, the Qing dynasty built this, right? And it was the last dynasty to rule China before it became the country that we know it today, as it is. So the Qing dynasty built this because they were constantly getting attacked by marauders across the borders. And so they said, let's build this wall and we will never be attacked again, right? Now, very logical. It took them 200 years to build it in various sections, etc., and an amazing structure, no doubt. But the point is, after the wall was made and after it was inaugurated with all fanfare, etc., what happened to the attacks? Do you think they were stopped completely, Sandeep?
I don't think so. I don't know, but I'm sure there was war
Yeah.
continuously for quite some time.
Actually, no. Yeah. Actually, no. The wall did stop some of the smaller attacks, but actually, the people who attacked now became that much smarter. Because what happened is, though the wall is thousands of kilometers long, obviously you will always have some gates in between, right? Because you need to take material out, get them in, trade has to happen,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Now, wherever you had the gates, you obviously had the gatekeepers also. And so earlier, the marauders found that they had to spend a lot of money to attack. Now it became very easy. All you needed to do is bribe those two people standing at the gate.
So
And so they
you
could
you
anyway
find the
attack only because the
weakest
people
link
were
in the
not
chain.
following the.
Yeah, you find the weakest link in the chain.
And the weakest link is what? Not the wall, not the brick. It's not the brick and mortar which is the weakest link. It is the person which is the weakest link, right? Yeah. So Anand there says they bribe their way in. Yes. So the people are the weakest link, and that again is the reason why we need to work on our people. So what I'm trying to say is, you put in place the best of OKRs, the best of scorecards, and everything else. If your people are not aligned and if they are not going to be disciplined, all of this is going to fail. Right? So the monitoring part really one needs to look at from that perspective. Okay. Is there any specific question that has come in? Anything else you want to talk about,
No, not that I saw
Sandeep,
on the
at this?
monitoring. We can move forward and take the questions in
Okay.
later.
Okay. Yeah, we will. Yeah. So now, especially in today's world, how do you monitor? Especially in a work from home environment. I think there's a question which has come in terms of work from home environment. What do you do in terms of monitoring? So now these are some of the new technologies you can say which have come in. Out of them, of course, WhatsApp and Telegram. I'm sure everyone knows, and you can do a lot of collaboration there. But if you've used some tools like say Slack, I suspect Sandeep, you are a fan of Slack. I suspect we've already discussed this earlier. There's a tool called
Used
Mural,
it
which I have used.
frequently. Yeah.
Correct. And then there's something called Discord. These are, of course, only a few. I'm not recommending any of these. I have not been
Yeah.
mandated, nor am I rewarded by any of them for recommending this. I'm just saying that
So,
some
so
of these
there's
are
the
the tools that
statutory.
can be used.
So we can have the statutory disclaimer in place that we're not getting any money to promote any of these. This is just an idea to tell you that there are tools out there
Yes, absolutely.
where you can use to collaborate with remote
Sure.
teams. That's basically the idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are the more important ones.
And the last 6-8 months, I think some of these tools which I have used, we found that they are fairly user friendly. Some of them are free, and so you can use them. So what I'm trying to say is, if an organization is not even using some of these tools at a corporate level, I'm saying the leader and his own team of 10 people can start using some of these tools for their own benefit. No, nothing is stopping them. That's the point.
I can already
Of
hear
course, the
some
harder
sales
tools,
guys.
again, the softer part, which is that
Pravin, I can already hear some sales guys saying, "Oh no,
Yeah,
not
go ahead.
another WhatsApp group."
Okay, I know. That's quite a nightmare for people nowadays. Okay.
Anyway,
So now, after you put in place your scorecards and OKRs, and after you use all your murals and everything else, it still doesn't mean that you will always succeed. For the simple reason, you need to have the softer tools also as a leader with you, and that is empathy, listening, and extremely high emotional quotient. Some of the sensitivity to your juniors' concerns and the emotional challenges. So I think I'll just touch on work from home for a minute here. See, work from home has turned out to be a boon or a bane, depending on how you look at it. But almost certainly, some of the people um, have been fairly happy in the sense that it has at least avoided them their commute. So if it is the Silk Board in Bangalore, or if it is the Western Express Highway in Bombay, or it is the Ashram Chowk in Delhi, these are the three huge bottlenecks that we always talk about. I'm sure people are not missing that because that saved them straight away 3 to 4 hours of travel time. But that doesn't mean working from home is turning out to be as easy as it looks, because not everyone has the luxury of having a room to themselves. Not everyone has the luxury of a quiet place where they can work from. Our houses in India, and specifically in the metros, are small. They are chaotic. We have large number of people. There are joint families. People work in shifts at times or different timings, and all sorts of mess is there. So, as a leader, am I paying attention to these things also when I'm looking at managing my team remotely? I think these are some of the things that a good leader in today's world should pay specific
Right.
attention to, without doubt, because otherwise all the tools will still be failing if we don't look at these concerns also. So that's the monitoring part that I wanted to bring in here. Okay, let's go ahead. If there are any questions, you can please help me. Otherwise, we can look at going
No, I
ahead.
think let's move ahead.
Okay, so we'll go to the So we're going to the last part, which is really the correction part. And so the correction step is really what we are saying after doing all of this. My same question again: if everything is good, if everything is so structured, why is there so much grief all around, linked with performance and rewards and stuff like that? So, is there a way of correcting it? Yes, almost certainly. There has to be a way. Otherwise, what are we here for? We have to use some of these tools and techniques to correct it. So the correction step also, just as everything else, we'll look at from various levels. So we'll start looking at it from a 30,000 feet level, as we call it, which is the strategic level, organization level, and then we'll come down to the specific individual level also. So now, in this particular slide, as we can see, the first thing that an organization can do is really to define specifically their mission, vision, values, goals, and targets. Now, I'm not saying this as a consultant. I know there may be many in the audience, and I know on the ground also who say, यार ये मिशन विजन वैल्यूज का कोई फायदा होता नहीं है, इसको बाद में फ्रेम करके हम लोग दीवार पे केवल टांग देते, right? Now that's a sad part, the way the mission vision values has worked out to be. It need not be like that, right? So if your mission vision and values are really that strong, then you can do wonder. You can do absolute miracles. Right? There is that apocryphal story. We don't know if real or not. It was said that when John F. Kennedy went to the Space Center, in the 60s, he asked a janitor, someone who was wiping the floor, in terms of saying, "What are you doing here?" And the janitor said, "I'm helping put a man on moon." Right now, what we are trying to really say is that for someone who was working at that level also, it was not a simple job of just coming and wiping the floor for 8 hours and going back and clocking in and clocking out. It was something where he was able to say, okay, you know what, if I do this, if I give them a good work environment, my country will be able to put a man on moon, and of course get him back also, because that was equally important, right? That was the mission and vision that they had laid out. So are our organizations really looking at that, or is it really a case of a drift? So organizations drift, people drift. That's not really the organization you would want to work with. So I think a correction really needs to be done at that stage. Sometimes we are, what can we say? Sorry to use a word called bombastic, but sometimes leaders really use some terms like these. So it's good to have those big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAG as we call them, BHAG. But at times those goals need to make sense. I was sitting once on a strategy meet with a leader. He was heading the organization, very successful person. Suddenly he went on a trip, and at the end of it, he ended up by saying, "You know what? We need to nick global poverty." Right now, that's an amazing statement, and it's a great, it's a very good dream. But look, I mean, you are also the CEO of an organization. As an organization, when we are sitting here to decide a strategy statement, you can't talk about nicking global poverty, though we all want to do it, right? What should be our contribution in doing it? I think that would have been a better way of maybe putting it. That's where the whole thing starts getting derailed at times. So what I'm trying to say is, let's look at making those large goal statements also a little more realistic, and those that people can relate to, which is the next point. They should be realistic and easily explainable also. Once that happens, what do you need? Do you have a competency framework at all? How are you going to measure? Many people don't even know the competencies. The interviewer doesn't know it, so he can't ask questions related with the competencies. So that's needed. And do you have something like a succession plan in place? Look at all the successful organizations, including small family-run businesses. If at the right time the succession planning is done, you have a pipeline in place, right? Otherwise, you end up like that situation where the patriarch of the company was 82-year-old, his son was 55-year-old, and when the discussion happened and he was asked, so when do you plan to hand over the reins to the next generation? He said, very soon, in a decade or so. That's what the 82-year-old said. Right? Now, what does this mean?
The Queen of England. The Queen of England.
I was about to come to that.
The Queen of England is still there, and Prince Charles is still Prince Charles in waiting.
So what we are trying
Yeah.
to say is that, at the right time you need to take these calls and decisions, because otherwise, where is your pipeline? It will dry up. And if you don't have a strong leadership pipeline, it's going to end up in trouble. So that's the point we were looking at. Okay, let's go to the
Yeah.
next slide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what we can really do then is, as a correction step, let's get everyone on a common plane. So, do something in terms of explaining to them what are certain baseline expected behavioral skills. Some organizations do it, and literally they take all the 4 or 5,000 people through a particular program. Where you say that anything below this is not acceptable at all. You have to treat others with basic level of respect. So, what does that mean? Take people, everyone, including the MD, right to the janitor. Everyone sits in those workshops, and they are basically aligned in a particular level. Do we have
It's
platforms
interesting,
and
Praveen. It's interesting you said that everyone needs to be aligned.
sure,
A lot of companies reserve this for just maybe the few levels at the top which are there. And sometimes I wonder that if we do it only for the people at the top over there, how are we going to develop the people down the line? Because if as a privilege, if you give it to the people who are already at the top, what's going to happen to the
yeah.
second line and third line of defense, as we say. So that's something very interesting that
And
it needs to be done across levels. Yeah.
and my, yeah, and my first level of interaction or your first level of interaction in any organization is typically the security personnel and the reception,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And those are the two experiences I come in with and I go away with, right? That's the point.
Absolutely.
Now, how are we doing on that? Maybe those are real questions that organizations need to ask, and that's where the culture building really also starts from.
The culture starts from there.
So
Yeah.
I'm keeping an eye on the wall.
Clock.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we could. I've been looking at keeping an eye on the clock also. The other thing, very, very important, is can we have something as transparent as possible in terms of the appraisal and assessment framework? I think this is now where we are coming down from a 30,000 feet to really the ground level in terms of what is happening to me. If I'm working in an organization, I want to know how am I appraised. I want to know how am I assessed. Is it transparent enough or not? Right? It's human tendency, human nature. Sandeep, you have been in organizations
That's
long enough. At the
that,
best of
that is
times, even after the most transparent, you will never end up with a happy person after the appraisal. I agree. Right? So even
this
if you give
is
someone one,
yeah, this is the real sore point for just about everybody in a large
sure.
corporate environment. The appraisal process, and it's like, for some companies I've noticed, like it's like a drudgery. It's like, oh God, abhi ye appraisal karna padega. It's like that.
So Sandeep, it's not just drudgery. There's a fear also among managers. How am I going to explain to this person that I am not giving you this rating and I am giving you this rating? And
That's there.
all of that is because the leader has no clue what that person has done because he has not kept a record. And large part of it is also because at the start of the year we didn't even look at setting up that scorecard, right?
Yeah.
So my submission always is that when appraisal time comes, your appraisal should not have started in March of 2021. It should have started in April of 2020 because that's what you are really appraising for. And then when you sit down and you don't have any parameters to fall back on, the recency effect, as we call it, comes in. So last 2-3 महीने में क्या किया उसने? चलो उसके आधार पे हम उसको rating दे देते. And then that does not end up making anyone happy, right? At the end of it, even after the most transparent system, you will still have become what it is you know well. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is the best performer, अगर मेरे को 1 मिला भी, तब भी मुझे ये होगा कि यार मेरे साथ साथ और 2 लोगों को भी तो 1 मिला, तो why did they get? So I'll never end up being happy. But all I'm trying to say is, at least let us have some kind of a measurable and transparent way of letting people know why we have given them that score, right? We'll never arrive at a perfect system. I'm being very frank as a practitioner. But all I'm trying to say is we have to put in our best effort. If we don't have anything to fall back on, I think we are going to end up in grief like we are doing now. And that's sad. That's sad. Okay. So transparent appraisal assessment, open doors for communication, very, very important. I think in today's world, it's 3 things really that work: communication, communication, and communication. Right. So that's the mantra that is being followed in today's world. So please do that. And the last point, which is something which again we face many a times when we are doing our initiatives. Don't roll out something because you heard it from someone or someone sitting next to you on the flight told you this is what is done, and so it becomes a flavor of the month, right? So don't do that. I think if you're doing it as an organization, as a leader, please do it only if you have your entire heart and head in it. You know really what you expect from it. So that would really be one of the ways in which a correction can probably be done. Okay. Along with that, some other, so these are some of the structural correction steps at a leader or at a personal correction step level. Can we have a grievance handling mechanism, especially with work from home? I think there are a whole lot of related things that are happening. Simple points. This might look very odd when I'm bringing it in terms of how I'm talking at a strategic level, but these are real issues. Your strategy is of no use if that person does not have a laptop to work with. I was working with a young kid recently, and he said last 6 weeks he's been struggling to get a laptop from his company, right? And of course, the company has its own challenges because they were shut down and locked down and all that. But even after that, for the last 2 months, I'm sure that cannot be a challenge. He says, I don't have a laptop, so half my stuff is on my personal laptop, half of it is elsewhere. My boss asks for this, I don't know, and then it becomes a big mess. So I think these are small things, but certainly we can manage it a little better, right? And can we learn along the way and reduce our rigidity? So there was an interesting client who said that there's no way we can do work from home. Impossible. And he had all sorts of reasons that he gave me. कि ये नहीं होगा, वो नहीं होगा. IP issues है. People are careless. Material ले जाएंगे, data जाएगा, फलाना. Now what happened? He finally had to come down to doing it. So it was pure rigidity. There have been cases, unfortunately, when there are ladies who have had to leave the workforce for the simple reason that they had home and this to manage. And I was always of the opinion that they should look at managing it well so that they can work from home, give them half the time, let them come 2 days in a week and stuff like that. They were saying, no, not possible. Is tarah se to hoga hi nahi. Baki log kya kahenge? And stuff like that. Now, where has all of that gone? Right? So now you lost great talent only because you were rigid. So that's the unfortunate thing that, yeah. Okay, so I think largely we've covered the 4 parts. Just to quickly recap before we open the floor for the audience. Recruit, we spoke about. Be very careful. Don't get swayed by some of those external glitzy features. Look at really what the material talent is. Nurturing, very important. Be very realistic in terms of expectations changing. Just because you stuck to a company and you've stayed there for 30 years, today's young chap is not going to do that. His needs are very different. He's already got a roof over his head. He does not have an EMI to pay. And so he will look at exotic things like maybe diversity and sustainability as something that helps him, but we need to live with it. Monitor, very important. There's a statement here, a question really from Alok. Should scorecard include quantitative scores and competency measures? Without a doubt, we just spoke about it. The scorecard has to come from first your competency framework, and secondly, it should be completely quantitative. Without that, and I can give you competitive scorecards for any function. I think that's a question that will come up because we always say, functions like sales and all are so easy to monitor, right? Kitna sale laya, kitne saal bhar mein kiya, ye quarter mein kya hua, vagara vagara. I can tell you that even as diffuse the function as corporate PR and even HR, everything we can actually narrow down and we can make it as quantifiable and as measurable as possible, right? We need to put effort to it. We need to understand it carefully. We need to start looking at that role from a different angle, but everything can be certainly quantified and it must be quantified in today's world. I think we all are answerable, so everyone is accountable, and that this is something that must happen. So once you monitor, finally get into the correction level. Correction should be looked at in the best manner possible. Please don't do correction, as Sandeep, you rightly pointed out, at only the top level. No, the top level, I mean, they are justified, but they are the ones who go to the INSEADs and the ISBs and the Harvards and get those, short courses. But what happens to your spine? Your body, the head, which is the thinking part, and the leg, which is the doing part, is really held together by the spine, right? Without a spine, your head may be most intelligent, your legs may be strong, they are of no use. And so most organizations, what are you doing to that middle band? You've got the 10% super performers whom you're spending all your resources on. The bottom 5 or 10%, you're putting them on the improvement plans and stuff like that, or you're planning to push them out. The 60-70% solid mass, which is your spine, what are you doing with them? You need to spend money and resources there also, because they are the ones who, if you can make a little bit of change, can actually start performing so much better. Right? So that spine is really the next part that I'm also looking at. So I would look at saying that distribute your resources well across. Okay, so I think that really is where.
What if there are any more questions? We'd be happy. And Pravin, a few people have requested for your contact details. So for those of you who are interested in contacting Pravin, now this is a shameless plug. Okay, not shameless, not from his perspective, but for those who really want to learn more and want to get in touch with Pravin, that these are his coordinates. That's his corporate website and his details. Okay, so Pravin, coming
My
back
email
to,
is also very simple. It's Pravin.
sorry,
I just
go
thought
ahead.
I'll send. It's Pravin, Pravin at elixircommunications.in. So the last part stays the same in the website. It's Pravin at Elixir Communications.
Yeah. So Pravin spelled as Pravin. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, so Pravin, you brought up a lot of interesting issues in terms of people, what they how they feel, not only what the corporate should do from the organization perspective, but what the individual should do. Now, tell me one thing. Since you worked with many companies,
Yeah.
looking at it from a perspective of a smaller organization, you see what happens is in a large organization you do have like an HR team or maybe a learning and development team, and you have all those teams. But in a smaller organization, typically, in a family-owned business, for instance, a lot of these roles are not defined properly. B, the people have not been trained well, because there may be an entrepreneur who's come up because of whatever he's done well or she's done well, but there is no formal training as far as HR is concerned, or people policies are concerned.
Sure.
What's your advice to such type of entrepreneurial organizations and to such entrepreneurs? What's the best way for them to figure out how to do this right? I mean, is there I know there's no one size fits all kind of an answer, but if you had to advise them that, hey, this is the one thing that you could do, or the two things that you could look at, and TK, the rest, everything else is there, but just focus on these two things and you're done.
Yeah. So you're right. That's just a really good question, because as you rightly said, one size can't fit all for two reasons. One, see, some of the organizations are led by one person. Right. And if it's just one person, the poor fellow spreads himself so thin, he doesn't know what he's doing from morning till evening. So he's in a bit of this, he's in a bit of that. And worst part is nothing moves in his actions. Right. If he doesn't take a decision, nothing moves, which is sad. So in such a case, what I would say is that till he achieves some kind of a critical mass, now he has to decide which organization he runs. If it's a manufacturing company, it could be 100 people. If it's a services organization with a lot of knowledge workers, it could be 40, 50 people. At that stage, he needs to start looking at all these processes and putting them in place. I actually have an enlightened client who, with only 25 people on in his team, worked with me and started putting in place these systems, because they were all engineers and they were high value workers in that sense. So he found it very, very important. So there's a critical mass. It's a tipping point. You need to take that call, right? Obviously, he himself can't do it. So there are two ways. One is to look at recruiting someone who's able to do it, or if it's a small assignment or if it's a limited assignment, it's always better to team up with someone who can put in place the process and system and then can move out. And then he comes in or she comes in only in terms of being able to look at the smaller parts off and on whenever needed, right? In terms of seeing that the system is working well. So that's one way. When you have large bandwidth at the top, and that's very tragic, Sandeep, you brought out a great point. No one knows who's in charge of what. And when families are big, or especially when the second generation comes in, then you have the top two people and then their sons and daughters and all of them, and everyone wants to do everything. And that's when the mess starts. At that time, I think very clearly, you need to sit across a table. And again, the 3 points: communicate, communicate, communicate. Decide how you can divide the functions. There are great family-run businesses which are run brilliantly only because no one tried to prove to the other person, look, I can do this job better than you. Yeah. So there are some people who do only technology adoption, who are doing only execution excellence. That person does only that. He does not look at the operational aspects at all. He's not even bothered to know what his headcount is probably. There's one person who's operationally excellent. He doesn't know what new products are coming up. They'll come into his kitty only when it comes on the production shop floor, right? So you need a mix of all of this. If you have people who are doing everything, and it's like the typical old story, right? Everyone thought someone was doing it, and in the end, nobody was doing it, or whatever. That story you remember. So that's very sad. So if you have greater bandwidth, actually, it's a great recipe for making a success, provided you know when to put the right thing and not push too much of tadka into it, as we always say.
Don't overcook it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah. Because this is what happens with family managed businesses and MSMEs. They don't have the luxury of it's like, let's say there's a company with a team of maybe 8 or 10 people, and they're providing some kind of services, so they will still face all those challenges, whether it's a work from home, whether it's an aspiration of a team member. So all those challenges will be there, but they don't really have the resources to be able to address these challenges the way, let's say, a medium size or a large size organization could. So that's where the real catch is. And I think it's becoming more and more important for people who branch out and start off as entrepreneurs, when they even start their companies, for them to be sensitized to this fact that, hey, this is what can happen, and this is what can happen to people. Fortunately, a lot of people who are working now are progressing into the entrepreneurial role, so they've been on the other side of the fence. So they know that, hey, as an employee, I felt bad when I never got the promotion, or when I was treated unfairly on a particular issue, and therefore they make sure that that happens well. But family business kind of an environment where somebody is just inducted, drafted, and I can use the word dragged into the family business. And when that person grows into the role, suddenly faced with a lot of challenges that they themselves don't really understand how to deal with. So I think from that perspective, few of your pointers have been really good. And at this point, let me acknowledge some of the people who have been commenting.
Good comment. Actually, Kaval has asked a very good question, which is, who is accountable at the end of the day for the process? Only HR. That's a question.
Kaval, who's accountable at the end of the day for this process?
So, Kaval, any process where only HR is accountable at the end is actually a failed process from the beginning itself.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So, if you ask me, whenever we are sitting down to create our OKRs, or the scorecard, or whatever name you want to give it, I'm not again plugging any particular this. We work on all of them. The important thing to understand is, we want the functional person also to be in it. It is not an exercise to be carried out with the OKR expert or a consultant and only HR. Not at all. The person who is heading that department, the business leader, he has to be the person who's actually creating those scorecards. That is the only way accountability can go to him also. HR can at best be a facilitator, right? HR can at best be a facilitator, which is why even recruitment, all the way from, actually all of these, even the recruitment, nurturing, at each stage, if your organization is robust and if it has great practices, they will always have everyone in the line function, as we call it, who's also part of it. That's the only way to succeed. If it becomes HR's baby, unfortunately, it will be ending up with only one parent. And I mean, sorry to make that kind of a statement, but yeah, I mean, that, if you have everyone who's kind of the baby, it's good.
Yeah, so Jignesh, thanks for watching. Glad you enjoyed it. Anand, great study, presented, explained, summarized. Okay, so
he's getting
yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, the program is great because you guys were watching and asking questions. So yeah.
So I think I must also appreciate all these people, because they could have been elsewhere, but they certainly decided to come here. So thanks to everyone. So many of them, Sanjay and Shankar and Alok and Kaval and.
There's a question, I think we missed this one from Devendra. Scorecard is a must. Any examples of a powerful scorecard design?
Yes, actually, Devendra, we wanted to do that, but we knew that time is going to be a bit of a concern. My suggestion would be that
maybe what we could do is, Pravin, you could probably get in touch with Devendra. You could get in touch with Pravin also separately, and or maybe if Pravin has a few ideas, we could probably just put it down in the comments just below the video, so that
As a matter of fact, it's not. Yeah. I would not want any one powerful scorecard design. I would like to understand what it is being used for. So there is a context to it, right? So there are 2 or 3 tools that we spoke about. Now, depending on what organization, the background is, what the organization background is, and what is the context, we will decide whether it has to be a particular scorecard or an OKR or some other goal sheets, etc., etc. Yeah. So that's so. Thanks, Devendra, anyway, for asking. We'll connect and I'll explain.
Mahesh, yeah, very informative. Thank you for watching, Mahesh. Javed, well, okay, we already gave out the details, and were there any? There were a few comments at the start of the program. Thank you for watching, Sajini. Anirudh found it insightful. Thank you very much for watching. Sanjoy says, great going. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's it. We covered most of the comments, and I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and also in terms of trying to understand how to deal with this situation which is there right now is something which See, this has been unprecedented. There is no book that could have told us to deal with what we went through. So nobody, no business leader knew what the right answer was. No political leader knew what the right answer was. We are all struggling, finding our own way, trying to figure out what to do. But I think with a few of the guidelines that are there in place, those are the ones that will help us get the answers. So just like we don't really know exactly what the COVID vaccine is all about, but there are certain principles that if we follow, we'll probably be able to figure out how to develop the vaccine, and that's what everybody around the world is doing. So I think that's the same principle we need to apply over here. And thank you, Pravin, for helping us demystify some of this, guide us, and show us what it is that we could do. Where are the pitfalls? What are the challenges? And a few suggestions on how we can actually overcome them. Thank you very much, Pravin. Thank you, audience, for watching. And any closing comments from you, Pravin?
Yeah. Before I sign off, no closing comments. Just I want to express my gratitude, Sandeep, for an amazing effort that you have put in. It's a great platform, as I said. I just want to reiterate, and I hope everyone in the audience, those who signed in and those who watched us, and to you, Sandeep, also, I want to wish all of you a great 2021. And I certainly hope that it is way, way better than what 2020 was. So I think that's the only thing I can say at this stage.
That's what we'll need to do is we'll need to make sure that it's a better year than the one that went by. Because the one that went by has been a landmark year and taught us a lot of things that we would not have otherwise learned. But having said that,
so I think one question no one is going to ask. The one question no one is going to ask is, what was your vision 2020? I think that's a question no one is going to ever ask again.
Right? It's so ironic because Vision 2020 is supposed to be the most perfect vision, and look what we went through. So anyway, on that note, a happy New Year to everyone, because it's the last program for this year, and we'll see you next year with some other subject matter experts to help and guide us through the new year. Thank you very much, Pravin. Once again, just stay online. I'll just end the broadcast. Yeah.